Hi there, what's going on? My name is Nazim, and in this video I'm going to talk about the number one thing that you should do on sales calls before you ever drop the price that will help you to increase your close rate by at least 20 to 30%. And it's a big mistake that a lot of people, online business owners, coaches, consultants, agency owners make on sales calls, which can be fixed actually very easily in about 2 to 3 minutes. And it's almost certainly guaranteed to eliminate any and all sorts of sales objections on calls, on sales calls also, or at the very least when it comes to uncertainty objections. And if you do this step right, it will eliminate all the other sales objections, and the only kinds of objections that you will be left with on calls will be essentially logistical problems where people want to do a to pay, or they have to wait for the money for another week, right, to hit their bank account, and then they'll for sure pay. But the sorts of objections that you typically get on sales calls, such as, hey, I have to think about it, or I'll run it by my spouse or my partner, should be eliminated or reduced by at least 80%. And the reason why I know how to do this is because in the last 10 years, I've made my clients over $40 million in sales, which is what that got me the ClickFunnels 10x Black. But back to you and your business. So let me draw out this scenario to you and let me know if it sounds familiar. You're on a sales call, you do very good information gathering, you essentially ask them why is it that they applied to have a sales call with you, then you dive deeper into their unique situation, you ask them about essentially the pain points that they experience, and then also what's their ultimate goal. And then after you decide that it's a good prospect that who can basically afford your services, you go through your entire pitch, right? The service or the product you're selling. And what happens after is obviously you drop the price. Now the problem is a lot of times people go mute and then they say, cool, thank you for information, I'll think about it, or I have to look at my finances, or have to talk to my spouse or partner, or maximum what they say is, do I have to make a decision now? And it's kind of pissing you off, right? I get it. It's annoying, right? You know that you can help a prospect, and maybe you've even realized and figured out by asking the right questions that this person can truly afford your services and they need your services, but still they choose to delay and push off making the decision. Now here's the trick, and this is the biggest thing that you have to do before you ever drop the price. And by the way, this is not something I came up with on my own. It's something I took from Cole Gordon, who's a great sales trainer, and I've had the pleasure to work with him on the past client projects. So essentially what Cole teaches a lot is after you do information gathering, after you figure out the prospect's pain points and concerns, and after you decide that, okay, it's a good prospect to pitch your services, and after you do the pitch, but before you drop the price, there's one extra step that you have to add to your sales process, and it's basically called temperature checking, or short for temp checking. And temp checking essentially is a process of pulling backwards a little bit, right? Not dropping the price yet, pulling backwards a little bit, and essentially trying to gauge on the readiness and how much of buy-in that your prospect has on what you're selling. The reason why it's so important to do this on sales calls is because typically people are used to the fact that sales calls are just from you as a salesperson, it's all go, 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 right? You're basically asking them questions, and then you give them your standardized pitch, and then you tell them about your prices, and it's basically you coming forward to them all the way, and they're essentially kind of like used to that. What's a breath of fresh air is you breaking the pattern and asking good questions and giving the pitch, but then also stopping for a second and showing some concern, right? For actually, if the offer or service is a good fit for their needs, right? And what the kind of picture that it paints in prospects' eyes is, hey, actually, this salesperson does care not only if I will pay the money for this thing, but actually if it'll work for me and for my goals. But that's not the only reason. Probably even a bigger reason why you want to temp check before you ever drop the price is because when you temp check, what happens is essentially you get the picture or the idea of how much your prospect actually likes your products or services. And the reason why it's important to understand is because once you drop the price, prospects have a very typical or very canned ways of going about kind of like rejecting your sales proposition. They don't want to be blatantly honest a lot of times because that would lead to a conflict, potential conflict on a sales call. So prospects like to basically wiggle around and say very similar things on sales calls. Something like, hey, I'll think about it, or I have to run it by my spouse, or I'll have to look at my finances. But a lot of times I would suspect that 70-80% of the time, I want to go over my finances or I'll have to talk to my spouse, it does not actually mean that they're going to talk to a spouse, but most likely it means one of these three following things. Number one, they don't trust you as a person. Number two, they don't trust your services that your services can help them. And then number three, they don't believe, maybe they believe that your product is good or your service is good, they just don't believe that it'll work for them, for their niche or for their unique situation. So it's usually one of the three. And obviously because the prospect wants to stay away from direct conflict, they'll come up and say something else, such as, I have to think about it. And what temp checking allows you to do is basically gauge on their buy-in for your product or for your service, which is, and this lack of buy-in into your product or your services is the most common reason why they have uncertainty objections, right? And again, uncertainty objections is them not being sure about one of the three things. They don't trust you, they don't trust your product, or they don't trust themselves and their abilities, right? And what typically happens when you temp check your prospect, you would give them a phrasing similar to something like this. For example, you drop the pitch and then you pause for a second. You obviously ask them questions and see if they have any questions about your pitch, which you should also describe as a series of multiple steps, right? And after each step, you ask them if they have any questions about basically the way you describe or the way your service unfolds. And after you're done with that, what you do is you say, okay, cool, John, just out of curiosity, because we've been talking for about 40 minutes, 50 minutes now, I've looked at your situation and I'm sure I can help you. And I also told you all about our services at our agency. I'm just trying to understand how confident you feel, right? That our solution, let's say our marketing services for lead generation, can truly get your marketing firm from essentially the point where you are now, where you're mostly referring on word of mouth, and actually take you guys from this point to building a predictable lead generation model. I'm spitballing here, right? So never mind. Predicting a lead generation model that generates 20 leads a week. Do you believe that our service can help you do that? And here it's kind of like a two-step qualification process. And here you'll have to look at their tonality, and if they say, yeah, I feel great, it can really help me out, then that's good. They passed the first step. But if they say, yeah, or maybe if they're not sure, also there's something you have to keep in mind. And then as you move on to the next step, the next qualifying point, that one is a lot easier, right? A lot more quantifiable, objective, if you will. The second qualifying question you ask is, okay, got it, no problem. Just out of curiosity, on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is definitely not a good fit, right, for your needs, our services, and 10, where you know that our services is exactly what you guys need to build a predictable lead generation system, like where do you feel like you fall on that scale, 1 to 10? And essentially what Cole says, and what I also know from my experiences, if they say anything lower than 8, then that means there's no even point in pitching your services or dropping the price, because the prospect is obviously not sold on your services. And this is the biggest point of this video and the biggest reason why you should be doing temp checking on sales calls before you ever drop the price. Because temp checking is essentially a way to find out if people even like your product or your services. And if they don't like them, it doesn't matter how cheap or how expensive or how good you think your services are. If they don't like them and they tell you, basically give you verbal cues about that, such as ranking your services at 7 or below that, there's no point in dropping the pitch, because 99.9% they will want to think about it. From my experience, no one has ever said, I feel 5 out of 10 about your services, and then I'll drop the price and said, okay, great. And then they said, great, let's go. Like, I'm going to pay the 10 G's right here on the call. A lot of times it's a minimum of 8 or more, so 9 or 10. The real 10 out of 10 happens very rarely, unless the person is just mesmerized by you or they've been following your content for a long time. But 8 or 9 are basically the two kind of like numbers you're going after. Nobody has ever done anything good or worth investing in at 7 or below, right? And if you temp check and you figure out that you're at 8 or 9 or 10, right? And if they say 8 or 9, you obviously say jokingly, hey, 8 or 9 is pretty good, but I'm just curious, like, what's holding you back from the 10? And then they might give you some interesting cues, right? It might be that, hey, this one thing that you explain about your offer, can I have a question about that? And then you obviously answer the question, you clarify, and then they say, okay, great. That being said, I'm a 10. Let's go. Or it can be that they say, hey, I'm not sure. It depends on the price. And then in that case, you want to double verify and say, yeah, I get it. But money aside, are you 100% sure that something really we can deliver objectively, our services, right? Is it a good fit or not? And if they say yes, great. What you've essentially done right now is if you've isolated only logistical objections that you'll get on sales calls. What that means is, if they say no after this, if they come to you and say, I feel 9 or 10 out of 10 about your services, and then they say, I have to think about it, then chances are very high that it's a truly logistical issue, right? And what that means is, it's either truly the price that you're selling the services for, or it's the payment plan, or it's actually still that they have something that they're unsure about, they just didn't tell you. But in that case, you can use the scale as a leverage to try to get the truth out of them. And what I mean by that is, if they say I'm 9 out of 10, and then they say I have to think about it, then you can be very honest and upfront about the whole situation. And you can say, John, can I be honest with you for a second? And no pressure, I totally get that. But I'm just curious, you said you're 9 out of 10, and this is something that you guys need, and you have essentially trust in our services, but you still have to think about it. Why is that? Like, what else is that you need to think about? Right now, what's going to happen most likely in that case is John is going to give you like a real objective reason, right? For example, hey, I have to really ask my CMO, if they're on board with this. And by the way, if they have a CMO who's going to be partaking in decision making, my question to you is, why the heck is not CMO on the call? You should have vetted for that. Or it can be something else, like, hey, I have like, today's Monday, and on Wednesday I'm getting like a big payment from a client, so let's like book for Wednesday, and that's when I'll make the payment. Right? Now, let's kind of like go back for a second. What if they say 7 or 6 or 5? Well, this is kind of like the logic there is also, I would say, quite simple. If they say I'm 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10, 5 out of 10, this basically means, again, one of the 3 things. They either don't trust you, they don't trust your services, or they don't trust themselves. And this is where you have to start digging in and try to understand which one of the 3, or they can be like 2 out of 3, or maybe even all 3 out of the uncertainty reasons, right? That's holding them back about feeling good about your services. And I would say, if you're having, especially if it's like first or second call with a prospect, and if they're feeling 7 or 6 or 5 out of 10, right, or even below that, I don't think you should ever pitch on that call. I don't think you should pitch. I think you should spend the remainder of the call on trying to figure out what is it that they don't feel good about, and then address it as much as possible. And then at the end of the call, say, okay, fine, John, I'm glad we kind of like figured it out and you feel better about our offer. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take essentially everything that we discussed on our call. I was making some notes, or my AI note taker was making some notes, and I'm going to take it back to my management team or to my partner, And, basically, we want to go over everything we spoke about and then see what would be the best rollout plan in your case, right? And if you're still keen on that, we can have a follow-up call, saying tomorrow or the day after, and I'll present you the full plan and really the customized pricing plan, right? That would make most sense in your case, right? And what that does is essentially one big thing, and that is it kind of like adds this delay or pause between you making them feel good about the product or services and them making a decision. Spitballing here, right? And the reason why you need to have a pause in there, and the reason why it's not a smart thing to jump immediately from fixing the 7 out of 10 or like this commitment issue to dropping the price, the reason why you want to have a bit of space in there is because for a lot of people, it's basically you would be asking them for too much. If someone felt not so confident about your services or kind of like iffy about your services, and even though in that moment or in the next 10-15 minutes you kind of like change their mind or convince them that it's otherwise, or you explain it to them, there's still some refractory time that's going to be needed for that person to kind of like internalize the reframe you put on them, and between that time and then making a decision. And asking for a decision immediately would be a big mistake, and you would basically risk of scaring people off. And the reason why you want to delay dropping the price is because you drop the price only once. And once the prospect knows the price of your services, well, now they have the leverage. I don't want to sound like your typical salesperson, or you know what I mean, right? We're all business owners here, marketers, salespeople, but just between you and I, the reality of sales calls, and especially if you do them, and what you need to keep in mind is the reality of sales calls is almost any sales call is prospects. You as a salesperson get on a call with a hope or like with the goal of closing the person or enrolling them in as a client, and the prospect, their biggest goal is to, quite honestly, to find out about the price and not make a decision. For most people, because people just generally are not risk takers or are not action takers. They like to delay, especially when it comes to investing money or parting away with their money, right? And what happens is, if you waste that one chance of dropping the price, right, and you waste it on a situation where they were not yet ready to make the decision, where they still need a bit of time to internalize everything that you went through. And if you waste that moment and then they don't make the decision on the call, and you have to get on a call with them, on another call with them, on a follow-up call with them, well then the chances, and if they were not ready, the chances of them getting on that next follow-up call are extremely slim, right? Now, I'm not saying that, nothing I'm saying is, I'm not talking absolutes. Nothing is of what I'm saying is certain. Yes, maybe you will sometimes drop the price after putting a reframe on them and doing the hard convincing. Maybe if you drop the price immediately, sometimes it will work, but more often than not, it won't, right? And there's this saying, or you only get to make the first impression once, something like that. It's the same thing with price. You only get to drop it once, the price. And you want to make sure, and this is the whole point of this video, is that the prospect is feeling 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 as bought in as possible, as sold as possible on your services. Because if they feel like that and they verbally confirm that, well, then that means whatever they either buy, right, because they feel great about it, or they don't buy, but the chances of them having an uncertainty-based objection are very slim. And most likely it's going to be a logistical objection, right? It's tied to logistics. Money coming in soon, have to genuinely talk to someone you forgot to invite to the meeting, or something else. And the thing with objection handling, and so much content on YouTube and so many courses created on objection handling, 90% of the time, the hard objections are not considered the logistical objections. They're considered the uncertainty objections that you will essentially prevent because you will not drop the price immediately and wait to get in their buy-in first. It's really the hardest objections to go through, right? The uncertainty objections, when they're not certain about the product or you or that it's going to work for them. Because that's tied to their belief system, and it's tied to, or the lack of thereof, right? And those things, they're basically tied to their decision making, right? And it's here. Logistical concerns and issues are out there. You can deal with that. You can deal with that. But what's tied up in here takes a lot more time to troubleshoot. And that's why, again, the biggest point of this video is the best way to overcome sales objections, uncertainty-based sales objections, is to make sure that you never have them in the first place, right? So that's it for this video. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and go to nazimconsulting.com if you like for me to have a look at your business, audit it, especially if you have sales, lead generation, and marketing bottlenecks. Then go to my website and I'll take a look and give you very valuable, honest input on what's holding you back from scaling your business even further.